Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of RegAlytics. Happy Valentine's Day and welcome to this week's Regulatory Roundup. This week there were 146 regulatory updates, and I'm going to see how many times I can use the word love while describing financial regulation. The regulator of the week for the second week in a row is the SEC. This week, the SEC adopted final rules for swap dealers. First, they clarified some issues around cross-border swaps. Second, they are requiring specific risk mitigation techniques to be applied to portfolios of uncleared security-based swaps. There are three subparts to this. The first one, ops people are going to love, and that's because it has to do with reconciling swaps using certain forms of portfolio compression exercises. The second will certainly be loved by the legal people because it is ensuring there's appropriate written documentation relative to these financial products. And finally, to be loved by both ops and legal people, there are final rules about record keeping, reporting, and notification requirements. And for my friends who love margin rules, the SEC has to periodically request feedback even on normal rules. And this week what came up was 15C3-1. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, there are people who literally build their careers on 15C3 margin rules. This rule requires broker-dealers at all times to have sufficient liquid assets to meet their current liabilities and particularly the claims of customers. Anyway, if you want to express to the SEC your views on how 15C3-1 could even be more wonderful than it is now, this is the time to confess your feelings. The topic of the week is illicit financing. The regulatory schema around counterterrorism and finance in the United States is full and rich with history and complexity. This week, the Treasury Department issued the 2020 National Strategy for Combating Terrorist and Other Illicit Financing. This roadmap is supposed to modernize the U.S. anti-money laundering and countering of the financing of terrorism, also known as AML, CFT, to make the regime more effective and efficient. The 2020 strategy identifies key threats, vulnerabilities, and priorities for disrupting and preventing illicit financing activities within the United States, but also for those that transport through the U.S. financial system. This also includes updates to the CATSA Act, or Combating Terrorist and Other Illicit Financing pursuant to the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act of 2017. In addition to loving incredibly long acronyms, I love extremely long regulatory titles. The big fine of the week was ABN AMRO Clearing Corporation in Chicago, which will pay more than $585,000 to settle charges related to pre-released American Depository Receipts, or ADRs. The SEC's order found that ABN AMRO improperly borrowed pre-released ADRs from other brokers when it should have known that those brokers did not own the foreign shares needed to support the ADRs. The order also found that ABN AMRO failed to reasonably supervise its security lending desk personnel concerning the borrowing of pre-released ADRs from these brokers. This is part of a long string of SEC busts related to ADRs, but either way, sounds like a tough breakup, man. And speaking of relationship abuse, big news out of CFBP last week. When Dodd-Frank was initially created, it empowered the CFPB to be in charge of preventing unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices relative to the buying and selling of financial products. The Dodd-Frank Act provided a basic set of guidelines around abusiveness, but there's really a lot of uncertainty around the definition. Last week, the CFPB provided a framework of how it planned to exercise its supervisory and regulatory enforcement authority to address abusive acts or practices. I didn't use the word love in that one, but let's just say they gave a bold declaration about what they consider abuse in a relationship. For my LIBOR of love followers, the Alternative Reference Rate Committee, or ARRC, released a consultation on Swaptions. So if you're trading those products, take a look. There's lots of fun related to discount curves, valuation, and CCPs. Also, an interesting tidbit this week, Freddie Mac recently released its MultiFamily outlook, which projects that the overall size of multifamily origination market will continue to grow, reaching $390 billion in 2020. To say things have changed since 2010, when the market was a mere $69 billion, would be an understatement. And the growth this upcoming year is after a record year in 2019, which was up 9% over 2018. For those of you watching SROs, CBOE announced this week it acquired two companies, a real-time risk analytics company from New York and a portfolio management platform provider from Chicago. The idea is that CBOE will have enhanced portfolio margin and capital efficiency tools within their platform. In cannabis, Connecticut proposed a regulation that identifies the latest enhanced list of medical conditions which may be treated with medical marijuana, and I know there are many of you who will love that. There was also a lot of state news this week, and the one that tickled me the most was Nevada Secretary of State's Election Division, obviously responding to everything that went on in Iowa, reminded voters that they have no role whatsoever in the Nevada presidential caucus. While they encouraged participation, they reminded everyone that it's actually the political parties that run these operations. Also out of Nevada, the Nevada Financial Institutions Division is proposing to develop, implement, and maintain a database storing certain information related to deferred deposit loans, title loans, and high interest loans made to customers in the state. They expect to be hosting workshops for affected companies in the state. They'll announce the times later. Earlier this year, the CFPB, along with a number of states, announced an initiative called the American Consumer Financial Innovation Network, which is built to enhance coordination among federal and state regulators as it relates to innovation and further objectives such as consumer access, competition, and financial inclusion. To that end, the Utah State Department held joint meetings with the CFPB to discuss with constituents how this can be enhanced in the state of Utah. More coming clearly with other states. And speaking of state innovation, the Iowa Insurance Division and its 2020 cohort of the Global Insurance Accelerator program, which included 8 InsureTech startups, working to improve insurance through the Accelerator's annual 100-day program. The state of Iowa prides itself on creating a regulatory environment which favors responsible innovation, and Iowa is actually home to more than 200 insurance companies. And last but not least, Illinois signed into law something new that makes it crystal clear that employees own their tips. Now, I know this is not officially financial regulations, but if you are going to go on a Valentine's date at a restaurant in Illinois, this can make you feel extra warm and cozy inside. The law amends the Illinois Wage Payments and Collection Act, and it states that gratuities are property of employees and that their employers cannot retain them. They need to pay the employees within 13 days after the pay period ends, And they are required to pay tipped workers a minimum of 60% of the state's minimum wage. And the tips and wage combined must equal at least the minimum wage, which rose to $9.25 per hour. So, enjoy your Valentine's Day. That's it this week for RegAlytics US Alerts. Join us every Wednesday morning on LinkedIn for your quick update and for the more extended version on our YouTube channel.